Welcome to the Screenplay Lab. I'm your host, Jeff Barker. I am a screenwriter, and this is a podcast where we will study and appreciate the standalone beauty of the screenplay as a singular literary device, not just a blueprint for a film, but the document itself. We will deconstruct one screenplay per episode, find out what is unique about that screenplay and what we can all learn from it. And we all love movies. This is a podcast about the document itself, the artistic expression of the screenplay. And this is our first episode. And I'm really excited that you're here and we picked a banger. This is Heretic by Scott Beck and Brian Woods. One of the truly most unique screenplays, very unusual elements, unmistakable and unique voice in this screenplay, and they take major chances and they pay off. So we have a lot that we can learn from digging deep into Heretic by Beck and Woods. And these two guys, longtime friends, writing partners. They're two Iowa boys that I believe went to high school together. Unusual elements in this story, and they've done that in other screenplays as well, such as A Quiet Place that they wrote. And it's been a while since I read that one, but I do remember it had some pretty interesting things in there, and also really short, but it's easy to write short when there's no dialogue. One of the things I remember reading about this several months ago was Brian Wood's father passed away, and it got him thinking about, what does it all mean to live and die and exist as a human? And I think that was some of the questions that he had on his heart when he started writing this screenplay with his partner. They're not Mormon, which a lot of people assume that they are, but of course they did their due diligence talking to a lot of people in the Mormon community. And if you go online and you watch videos and that sort of thing, you will see that the Mormon community says that this is pretty accurate as far as at least the fundamentals of how they actually execute their day-to-day. So let's get started with Heretic by Beck and Woods. The official logline is a good one. Two young missionaries are forced to prove their faith when they knock on the wrong door and are greeted by a diabolical Mr. Reed, becoming ensnared in his deadly game of cat and mouse. So that's a good one. So when I'm breaking down a screenplay, I'll sometimes try to rewrite the log line to see if I can make it better, do something different with it. But this is a good one, and there's not a lot you could do to improve it unless you could change a few words here or there, obviously. But the only thing that you maybe could consider is adding a time element to it. And I thought about that, but there really isn't a time element in this one. I mean, I think, it's just sort of like an overall dread. The time clock's ticking because something bad's going to happen to these young ladies. So yeah, that's a really good log line. The tone of this screenplay, there's some obvious ones. Dark and tense. Of course, when there's a horror movie or a thriller, and I don't like to go for dark and tense because that's low-hanging fruit. Obviously, it's dark and tense. So let's go deeper. I would say morally complex, thought-provoking. This is a screenplay that wants you to question faith, question your own beliefs, whether that makes them weaker or stronger. The idea of good versus evil is throughout the screenplay. Dread is a tone, obviously. The pacing builds a sense of creepy unease throughout this document. There are bursts of terror in here, obviously, but what's truly scary about this screenplay, and eventually the movie, is the quiet moments. That is where it is scary, as it usually is for this type of genre. But I think the tone that is most appropriate and the one I like the most is bleak. The tone of this screenplay is bleak. These are two young women, Barnes and Paxton, who are drenched in hopelessness inevitability. I mean, from the moment Mr. Barnes opens the door, you know that this is going to be a difficult journey. And so that is the tone that I would cling to, is bleak. I like that one. We'll discuss theme a little bit later, but I want to get into the pages because that is the most fun part about this, digging deep into the actual text and finding interesting things. If you're listening to this, I'll be reading some of the text, and if you want to see it, you can watch it on YouTube, and I'll actually include the text if you're watching on YouTube right now. I appreciate it. All right, well, we're going to start with what is cool and interesting and unique, and just sort of build up to where it just becomes like, whoa, that is wild that they did that. So let's get to it. First thing I want to look at is the voice that Woods and Beck use in the parentheticals throughout. They do some very interesting choices, interesting things that you don't normally see. I mean, I have seen this in some screenplays, but so let's just start here. Look at page 2. This is Paxton talking. She's saying, she's talking about when she was watching the pornography, which is a great scene that sort of sets up the innocence of these young women, but also already they're willing to go outside of what their religion expects of them. And anyway, she's talking about that. She says, it was two people having intercourse, sexual intercourse, and then here comes the parenthetical, and it says, come on, just say it. So I think that where a lot of people would say, you know, searching for words, embarrassed, they're using her inner dialogue to sort of put us both in her place to know what she's thinking, but also to add that parenthetical. So that was a unique choice. Page 16, we see again Paxton. She says, it's funny, Sister Hall was telling us how to put this politely. So this is a unique one in the fact that not only is it putting us, giving the actor some direction of like, okay, this is the mind frame of this person. It's also giving us more information. The next thing I wanted to show you here is, now we're getting into more and more interesting things, is the use of colors and highlights and unique fonts throughout the screenplay. So let's look at page 7 here. And we've got the red font, as you can see that. Page 43, we see we see the black highlight there, which is interesting. It says a small flight of concrete stairs leads down into darkness. And since they mentioned darkness, they put a black highlight on there. Over on page 34, we see where they give us the two options of the door. They point that out in the screenplay. And so they show the yellow door is yellow font with purple backing, and the purple door is purple font with yellow backing. Interesting choice. And then on page 5960, we get the belief disbelief that's written on the door. And they use this unique font that looks like it was written with a Sharpie. This is actually a font, as you can tell, because the E and the F are exactly the same. And it's also big. And so now we're starting to see more bold choices here, taking up space. On to page 71, this entire action line here is bolded. Part of it's highlighted. The blueberry pie is in blue. And then look on page 82. I really think this is really interesting how building up the anticipation, building up the momentum. They take, nothing happens and it just grows and grows and grows until the font is so big that the ding dong is all, taking up half of the space of a line. The next thing we want to look at is the unique way that Beck and Woods include the reader, us, in the story, talking directly to us. Let's look at page 13 here on the screenplay. This is when Mr. Reed is talking to the young ladies, and he mentions that there's metal in the walls, and it's just one quick line, and Mr. Reed disappears through a doorway while, quote, the walls and the ceiling have metal in them, end quote, rattles around our subconscious. So he's not saying that, they're not saying that it rattles around the young lady's subconscious, saying it rattles around our subconscious as the readers, and I think also as the viewers of the movie. Page 14, he's talking to the young ladies, and Mr. Reed is, and then there's this action line. It says, he's paraphrasing David Foster Wallace, but it's unlikely the girls noticed the plagiarism. So this is a situation where Beck and Woods are pointing this out to us to kind of keep us in the loop, including us as storytellers, sort of like an inside joke between the reader and the author. And it's to bond us, so now we're more invested. Bold choice. Let's look at page 25 here. There is a darkness to that last line that hangs in the room. We may even hear the uncomfortable shifting of audience members in their seats. Now this is highly unusual and really cool. So now as an action line, they're not talking about what the characters are doing. They're talking about what the audience members are doing. And so now they're projecting this screenplay a year or two ahead to the movie theater where the movie's been completely made and everyone's sitting. And this is something that's going to bring anxiety. That's a very interesting choice. And one more on page 39 here, the action line. They're talking about, you remember reading about this device that was filling up with water and then emptying. It's like a thwack, it's doing that thing. It says, the action line says, every once in a while, this device gets full and does a dump reset action that creates a loud thwack noise, which will be particularly useful to accent suspense in key moments. So this is an action line in the screenplay, but it's used more like a production note. A note to the director, a note to the prop department, and to say, hey, this is something that you can use to build anticipation, to build anxiety. Okay, so now we got through that, and now we're going to get to the really cool part. And I appreciate you sticking with me this far because you may know, if you follow screenplays or you've read this one already, that one of the really unusual things is the use of images and imagery in the screenplay. And there's tons of it in here. And it's something that you do not normally see. Let's look at page 26. Boom, right there. Blueberry candle taking up 3/8 of the page. And if I remember correctly from watching the film, that looks exactly like the candle in the film. That's probably taken from some site where you buy the candle and then they actually went and bought the candle, because I think it looks like the exact one. But isn't that interesting to see an image that big and that bold right there in the middle of the screenplay, that use of space on the page? It doesn't end there. Look at page 51 and the Monopoly sets. And this is when Mr. Reed is talking about iterations of religion and how the Monopoly is a great example of one Monopoly is an iteration of the previous one. And look, right there, they've got not only the Monopoly boards, but also the religious imagery next to them to show. And the landlord's game, the first Monopoly, is really interesting to me. Side note, which has nothing to do with anything other than to say the lady who made that game is from this small town that I live in right now. And this town is actually on that board. Isn't that cool? And the story goes that I believe it was a heater salesman from Chicago came down to where we live, loved the game, took it back up to Chicago, and then changed up a few things, iterations, and sold it to Parker Brothers. So that's in the screenplay as well. And so that must be true. Look at page 58, and we get to see some religious imagery there. This is, like this is like nothing to nothing, but it's in there. And it shows you, what this stuff looks like. Pretty cool. Look at 106. We have hand drawings, and you can tell this isn't a font. This is, or at least I don't think so. This is an actual, someone drew this on a pad or something, made it into a JPEG, and then stuck it in the screenplay. These aren't the only examples. There are tons of examples in this screenplay of pictures and images. And that was why I chose this as the first screenplay to go through here on the Screenplay Lab, because this is what we want to do. We want to dig deep, see what's interesting, see what's unique, see what we can learn from it. Does that mean that you should all go and still images and put them in your screenplay? Probably not. But if you want to, do it. Yeah, do what you want. Doesn't matter. There are no rules. There are some things to consider, though, before you make a choice like that. For example, and there's a huge debate going on right now about but formatting and elements to a screenplay. And my position is this, if you want to know what I think. If you write a really good screenplay and you include stuff like this, images, pictures, you make bold, unique choices, no one's going to care because you wrote a good screenplay. If you write an average screenplay, or God forbid, a bad screenplay, and you put this sort of thing in there, people are going to laugh at you. But they're going to say, this guy's a clown, doesn't know what he's doing. So what does that tell you? I believe it really just comes down to the story. If it's a good story, this may make it eye-catching and more interesting. If it's a bad story, then nobody cares anyway. All right, now we're going to move on to another element which I think is unique and interesting for this screenplay. Let's look at page 32. We'll go ahead and pull that up so you can look at it. This looks like a normal screenplay page, a very good one because there's a lot of white space. There is action lines interspersed throughout. They're not long action lines. It keeps it moving. The authors here, the writers, are telling you how to read their screenplay. There's a good pacing. But there's something unique about this, and by now you've probably spotted it. No punctuation in the dialogue. Take a look at that. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think this is the only place in the whole screenplay that this happens. This is obviously the scene where Mr. Reed leaves again, and the young ladies are in there together trying to figure out what to do. They want to leave. The door is locked. And so this is a very urgent scene where they're growing a lot of anticipation here and anxiety. And they don't have time for punctuation. That's the message I get from this. We don't have time. You got to go, go, go. The only punctuation that they use, and no capitalization, and the only punctuation they use is the question marks to clearly indicate if the line is a question or not, which I appreciate. But if it's supposed to have a period or something, it's not in there. And start of the sentence, no capital letters, creates this urgency. I thought that was really interesting. And again, I think this might be the only place, I could be wrong, that happens in the screenplay. Another thing that I wanted to show you is the use of notes as part of the action line. I'll show you what I mean. Let's look at page 34. This is an important scene in the screenplay. This is the library. And, if you and I were writing this, I'll just say what I would do. If I were writing this scene, I try to, if I know it's going to be a place we're going to be for a while, you definitely want to set the mood, set the setting, describe what it looks like. And you want to do it in as few words as possible to keep the screenplay moving. So I would probably put in maybe 3 or 4 lines, maybe drop some more information in a different action line. And that is the very classic way to do it. But here, they did it as a list. And this is really interesting. When they go into the library, it says, here are a few things you may notice immediately. Number 1, the books. And then they talk about it. It's almost like a dictionary entry. Number 2, the lectern, and it describes it. Number 3, the wife, which, you barely see her, but it describes it. Number 4, the red curtain. Number 5, the altar, and it describes it. Number 6, the 2 doors. So they didn't just list these 6 things, they numbered them. So that tells you right away that they want you to see these things one at a time. First see the books, then the lectern. So they're building off of each other until you get to the last one, which is the doors. And you're like, uh-oh. It says, number 6, the 2 doors, both on the far wall, they are closed and crudely painted 2 different colors, yellow door, purple door, and this, we talked about this earlier, where the fonts and the highlights show you those 2 characteristics. Bold choice. Beck and Woods, not afraid to make some interesting and bold choices. Now we're going to go on to some of the action lines that I think are just really brilliant. And this is an important thing to do in dissecting a screenplay. Pull out what you appreciate and honor it. So that's what we're going to do here. Page 39 is the first one. We're just going to look at 3 real quick. This is Mr. Reed has just given some information, and the action line says, if Reed is trying to make them feel comfortable, he has failed. The thought of a house designed to stop a phone from making calls is very clearly nightmare fuel. So that's an interesting way of putting it. I get this feeling when I read that as a reader, I'm being included in the story. Like, hey, it's like a nudge. Hey, this is nightmare fuel. This is some serious stuff. Next one's page 44. And this one is really cheeky and interesting. Mr. Reed is giving them some more information to think about. And then the action line is, a moment of silence for all the awkward, upset feelings swirling around the room. So it's like, again, cluing us in on how they're feeling. It's doing its job as an action line, but it's done in a very unique and interesting way to include us as the reader. And then 46, this is the most important one, I think. Mr. Reed says, as part of his dialogue here, I think it's something you should consider carefully and then make the right decision. Do you want me to help you? And the action line is, what can they even fucking say to that question at this point other than, and then you've got the dual dialogues. So I really like that, how he said, what could they say at this point? So again, we're no longer at the perspective of the characters. We're back at the perspective of the reader, and this happens throughout the screenplay. But what also is interesting about this is a place where Beck and Woods have chosen to give the characters agency again, which is an interesting buzzword going around right now, but it's not a new concept. It is that we want characters who have a say in what's going on in the story. We don't want things to just happen to them. And if you think about it, in the beginning, they had a lot of agency. They chose to go to that door, even though they really weren't supposed to. They chose to go inside, even though they really weren't supposed to. They made some bad choices. They even chose to be polite when they knew deep down they needed to get away. So after that, though, when you go back into the library, into this scene, they then begin to lose their agency because they're held captive. So now, just with this one line at least, subconsciously we are giving the choice back to the character and saying, do you want my help? You can say no. Another artistic choice that they make is cascading action lines. This is something I like to do, and I was really pleased to see it in the script. So let's look at page 98. You'll see how the action lines in the middle of the page build downward, and it's a great way to illustrate that we're getting information. I like to do this. It's beautiful. It's artistic. But it needs to have a purpose. And this purpose is to say, we're gaining information. First, we see the blood. Then we see the blood falling. Then we see the blood falling down. Then we see the blood falling down Sister Barnes. Then we see the blood falling down Sister Barnes' neck from a gaping wound. So it's beautiful on the page because the lines are cascading out. I often try to cascade them back down as well if it makes sense. But I really did appreciate that they did that there. Another thing they do in this screenplay that you don't see every day is a postscript. So after the screenplay, they include some information, which is great. I believe they may have done this in The Quiet Place too. And but the really funny part is the last thing of the postscript, and it says here, the collection influenced the author's understanding of the topics discussed in the screenplay. It must be said that the characters have minds of their own and only speak for themselves. That's a funny thing to say, but we all know it's true. I mean, all the characters we create come from our subconscious, whether we like it or not, all of their good traits, bad traits. And but once they're alive on the page, they really do. They are who they are, because you have to be true to who that character is if you're actually going to build a real character. And he's saying here, don't come at me about Christianity or religion or Mormonism. That's what they said, not me. So I think that Beck and Woods, they could easily be comedy writers, the way they incorporate some stuff into their screenplay. And then I always like to look at my favorite piece of dialogue, and that's what we'll do now. There's lots of strong dialogue, especially from, well, really all three characters, and all three have very unique perspectives. Mr. Reed obviously has the philosophical lines, the ones that make you think, and not that it has anything to do with the screenplay, but Hugh Grant just nailed it. I mean, absolutely nailed it. But I really like this dialogue. Let's look at this, page 60. It's split with action lines and this disbelief font, but really it goes like this. It says, if God is real and he's watching us when we masturbate and has such a fragile ego that he only helps us when we beg him and flatter him with praise, and he hates gay people for being who he made them to be, then that is terrifying. And then he goes on to say, if there is no God and we're just horny microscopic ants floating on a rock through space with no divine purpose and no reasonable hope to achieve eternal life, then that is also terrifying. It's really good dialogue. I was reading it more from an academic perspective, but as an actor, and I'm not going to perform the lines, but a good actor can really just really nail that. And so, and as writers, that's our job, is to give them things that they can bring to life. Another thing I wanted to talk about is this long scene, and this is something you do see in some screenplays, but it is against the conventional idea of how movies should be, the pace of movies and screenplays and how they should move along. This scene in the library is 22 pages long, so it's at least 22 minutes long, I suspect. I do remember it being quite long. It's a long time to be in one place. It's very interesting. And they do a really good job of making it interesting. But there is a scene in here added in the middle that's a half page, and that is Elder Kennedy from the church going door to door looking for the young women. And I wonder if they put that scene in after the fact. Maybe not, and it doesn't really matter, but I don't know why, but my gut's telling me maybe they wrote this scene and thought, man, that's too long, we need to break that up. We already introduced this guy earlier. It's a great time to check in with him, see how it's going. And it's important because it gives the reader a breath to be able to, like, because it's so intense in that library. And then you go right back to it. You got to reset. You can get another 11 minutes because it really is right in the middle of this scene, and it's only half a page. So you're talking 30 seconds. I think I remember it being a little longer in the movie, but, he's going door to door. Have you seen these girls? And of course the rain, there's another opportunity to see the ominous storm outside, which sets the tone a little bit. But I think the most important thing it does, besides break up the scene, is it adds some tension, and it also gives the reader hope that these two young women that we're now invested in have a chance. Because if they have no chance, if they're caught in this situation and they can't get a signal out from their phone, they can't get through the door, this guy's clearly above them from an intellectual standpoint, 2 steps ahead, then they have no chance. Why are we even watching this? We could have ended it 30 minutes in. So this is another opportunity to say, okay, look, there's this rescue raft. It's way out in the horizon. May not mean anything, but look, it's out there. Maybe this raft could drift a little closer, and these young women have a chance. And the final thing I wanted to share with you from the pages is this idea about the butterfly. So you remember Paxton mentions earlier that when she dies, she'd like to be a butterfly, and not just that, but also a butterfly that lands on someone's finger. I don't remember if she actually mentions reincarnation or not, but she's obviously thinking about spiritual and philosophical things outside of the realm of Mormonism, which gives us more insight into her character. But there's a lot of questions and debate online, Letterboxd and different places where people are trying to figure out the butterfly. What does it mean? Well, good news. There's an answer in the screenplay. So no one's looking at the source. So let's look at it. Page 123. This is the final lines of the screenplay. It says, is it a sign from Barnes? Is it a message from God? Is it a butterfly dream? Are we in a simulation? Is it just a coincidence or a hallucination, a divine confirmation? And here's the answer. The answer is, who knows? So, okay, maybe we don't exactly know, but that is the answer. The answer is we don't know. There was no message in the movie or in the screenplay to say this is what the butterfly means. It means any and all of those things. And it's important because it further highlights this idea of faith, which is at the center of this screenplay throughout. And that is, if you are in the camp of having faith, then not knowing is the key ingredient to having faith. If you're in the camp of we're all just molecules waiting to decompose, then you should have some intellect to realize that, okay, but you really don't know. So this is the whole point. Either way, you don't know. And so I thought that was really cool that they ended the screenplay that way. Well, we're in the home stretch now, and let's look at theme, which is sometimes the most difficult thing to pick out in a screenplay, but in this one it's not. It's very obvious. And to me, it all goes back to the staircase. You have these two choices, to believe or not to believe. That's the obvious first theme. The interesting thing about the staircases, and I think that this is the main point of the story, is they're both very scary. You have to choose. Either way, just like in life, you have to choose who you are and what you stand for and what you don't. And they both lead to the same place, which is death. And everyone knew that. Even the young ladies in the room ultimately figured out, okay, no matter what, we're going into the same place. So that was an important theme of the movie. The screenplay asks, is belief in a God a choice, a compulsion, or a survival mechanism? I think that is one of the main themes. And these are things that we chew on and why this movie is interesting. And then my favorite theme that I'm going to pick out of this is fragility of certainty. I like that word, fragility. How easily deeply held convictions will crumble when faced with fear and doubt. I think that was an important theme of this screenplay. Now we'll look at structure, and we won't spend a lot of time on that. There's a lot of debate about structure. Does this screenplay hit all 11 Save the Cat beats? I don't know. I don't really care. But it does have all the key ingredients. And as a screenwriter, you still have to tell a story in a certain way that has a buildup of anticipation, questions that have to be answered, climax. So quickly, just to identify some of the obvious ones in here, the inciting incident is the missionaries realizing Mr. Reed is not as polite as he may seem. The blueberry candle is probably the pinnacle of the inciting incident. Act 2, rising action, is when they're forced to participate in Mr. Reed's game. Their faith wavers, and then they try to outsmart him by using their religious training, which is interesting way to go about it. Go about it as I mean the story itself. Act 2 midpoint is they sense his vulnerability, and now they feel like they have the upper hand. The Act 3 climax, the final challenge demanding them to consume the poison pie. and he presents it as possibly creating a new iteration of religion, which I think they made a great choice here, was to make that ambiguous. Is he really trying to create a new religion, or is he still just messing with them? If they just gone full-blown religious lunatic, the story itself loses some of its power. But they didn't do that. They left it up for interpretation, which I think was a great choice. And then there's the resolution. Well, that is Heretic by Scott Beck and Brian Woods. I just want to say to you two gentlemen, thank you for writing this screenplay. It was a pleasure to read. I also write psychological religious horror, so it was right in my sweet spot. I admire the bold choices that you made here, and they really did pay off. And I appreciate the opportunity to see something new and to learn from it. And I hope you also, listening to this podcast, learn from it as well. And, I think one of the takeaways is the debate about standard formatting versus creative flair. And, we talked about that earlier. But if you decide to write a screenplay and fill it full of images, I will just say, may the 10,000 gods bless you. Here's some call to actions since you've made it this far. Please comment, like, subscribe, all that stuff. Please share this with your screenwriting friends if you think they may like it. If you have some people in the industry, boy, I'd love if you'd share it with them. Keep reading screenplays. It's so important to read screenplays. I also write novels, and when you're writing a manuscript for a novel, everyone knows if you want to be a novelist, you have to read a lot of books in your genre. It's not uncommon to read 50 to 100 books a year in your genre, because you're just piling in all this information of pacing and structure and the voice, and then you're regurgitating it in your own way, but you have to be constantly putting something in to get something out. In screenplay writing, I think once you get beyond film school and the initial, screenplays that you read earlier in your career, then there's not a whole lot of reading for some people. So it is important to continue to dig into screenplays, see what's working, what's not working. So that would be my call to action. Keep reading, keep writing, and never let the no's slow you down. Never let the rejection slow you down. It is art. It's subjective. Just keep going. I promise, just keep going. That's what I'm doing. And next week on the Screenplay Lab, I'll tell you, we're going to be digging into our next screenplay, which will be Nosferatu. Can't wait to see what that one has in store for us. So I will see you next time on the Screenplay Lab.